Moving along to talk about feedbacks next. This is two-way feedback for communication of those devices that are controlled via IP or RS-232. So if you want to find out, is this receiver turned on? What's the volume level in zone 2? What's the volume level in zone 3? What input is being watched on zone 1? Things that can be tracked for those IP or RS-232 devices. Now, in a previous step, we browsed and imported our feedback for the Integra receiver. The second step is to make sure that you have a device assigned to that feedback. So if I click on the title of the imported feedback, I refer to the properties window. We can see that the second field down says no device attached. I'm going to attach my Integra RS-232 device. This allows the feedback and the device to communicate on the same gateway within the application. If you don't assign a device, the feedback will never populate. So make sure that you're following this step when you are setting up your feedbacks. Now, where you put your feedback is up to you. You can put it any page, any panel that you would like. What I'm going to do for this scenario is I'm going to create a brand new panel and I'm going to create a brand new page. So inside my panels window, click on the green plus sign. We see we have a new panel. A couple things you can do with that panel. I'm going to rename it. Just label as feedback. And hit return. I'm going to open up this feedback panel, add a landscape page by right-clicking and adding a new page. Inside this page, completely blank template that I can do whatever I'd like to, and I'm going to look at my feedbacks. So I'm just going to do a single page to populate my different feedbacks. Open up my feedback. I can do a volume, bring that onto my page here. Find out the power state. Find out the mute state and the current source. So I drag and drop these elements onto my screen. We can see that with the volume bar, we get a bar as well as a numeric number. You can edit this. If you have a setup that you just want to see the bar, maybe you just want to see the number. Click on the feedback within the builder, go to your properties window, and for the display option, change it to both, to bar only, to number only, and you'll get that specific feedback on your page. We can also change our feedbacks textually. So if you want to see your main zone as a different font, as a different color, you can make the same text edits that you did within the rest of the application. Same way you change the label, we can also change the textual feedback state. Now, one of the additions that we've added to the builder is the ability to do logic as well as an action on feedback. So let's say you have a button, call it a mute button. You want to update that mute button when the state of the mute has changed. So that way you can get a visual display of the actual state of your receiver. So more than just textual telling you that the mute is currently on. What you can do is double click on your mute textual feedback. Inside here, you can see the macro view, and we can add commands the same way we have before. But let's say you want the image to change based on the state. That requires logic, if-then program. What we can do is add conditionals, add variables to those conditionals to match our certain state. Now, with our macro, I'm going to go to my More tab and find my conditionals. I'm going to drag in an if statement. Now, with my if statement, you'll see that we have empty equals empty. We want to assign a variable to the different levels of the feedback. Now, before, when we talked about variables, we assigned the variable to the things that we wanted to change. In this scenario, we're assigning a variable to the information that we want to track. So if I go to my feedbacks tab, we have 3 different tiers that you can assign a variable to the feedback. I can click on the title and I can track all the feedbacks within the Integra preamp. So if anything were to change, whether it's for net USB, for the iPod dock, for the volume, I can track any change at all on that receiver, and I can process a variable on that feedback. If you want to go to a more specific tier, we can go down to the textual feedback I can click on the mute state, and you can see in my properties window, I have already set a variable for mute. So I can track just the mute textual feedback. You could assign this to your power, to your source, so you could track a specific source. The third and final level is what we talk about with the code level. So let's look at the volume, go down to the code and the value level, and we can set a variable on this value level to track that when I get to 25 decibels, toss this image on my screen or flash some messages on the screen. You can track very specific numbers within that feedback. So in this case of the example that we're talking about, I'm going to track this mute state. I've already got my variable set where it says mute, and I'm going to go back to my if statement, and inside the properties I have my left hand side, my right hand side. For the left hand side, this is your variable, so I'm going to click on that cog icon. I'm going to type in mute and find my variable. So now my statement's going to be if mute equals mute on, I want a mute on image to appear. So what we'll do is I'm going to go back to my screen. I'm going to add a couple images for mute. Add a common button here, and we'll bring in this mute button. Now to change the image, just like we did with our background image, you need to assign this to an image ID. For a single button, we'll go inside the command itself, and we see our cog icon. I'm going to do mute image and hit return. So now going back to that logic, if mute equals mute on, go to my More tab. Under Actions, I have Set Variable. I'm going to drag this into my if statement. So if mute equals mute on, then is underneath the if. I want my set variable for the mute image to equal a different graphic. So in this case, I've got a different color mute button that I want in place. Drag it into my set variable, and there's my statement. If the mute equals mute on, I want this transparent image to appear. Now with the rest of the logic, I can do an else if saying that if mute equals off, set this image. But in a scenario like this, when you only have mute on or mute off, you only need to track the variable for mute on. So we'll do else. So in this case, if it doesn't equal mute on, if it's any other scenario, then it's going to be our else statement. We'll drag in our set variable. We'll do mute image equals our black mesh graphic. So if mute equals on, we get our transparent graphic. Otherwise, have the mesh image appear on the screen. Another example would be input. So let's say that with our source, feedback, we can do more if-then scenarios. Let's say you want to have an image populate based on the source that you're currently watching. Let's find an image that we'd like to use. We'll look at our activities, and we'll do a single image here. Say that we're watching DirecTV on a satellite, we'll put that here. So what we can do with another conditional is we can change this image based on the source of our receiver. So once again, I'm going to assign a variable to the image state that we're using for the default state here. Go to the cog icon. We're going to do input image. And then inside my source feedback, I'm going to add a conditional for if. And on my left-hand side, again, we're going to track the feedback of the input this time. So I'm going to go back to my feedback, and for source, I'm going to type in a variable for input. And now for my conditional, I'm going to track that input. And for operator, we have equal, we have not equal, we have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So choose the proper operator. In this case, I'm going to use equal. And now I'm going to type in the source that could appear as the feedback. So that is what we call a replace with value. So we see these titles here. So in this case, I'm going to do cable sat and hit return. So the scenario, if source equals cable sat, I want that DirecTV image to appear on my screen. We'll right click. We're going to add a set variable. And now we have that input image. And we'll find the image that we would like to use. Here's my satellite for that scenario. Couple different scenarios. We can do else if. In this case, we're going to have the left-hand operator have this tracker input still. But if it equals BD DVD, I now want my image to be Blu-ray. So I'm going to add another set variable. Add another set variable to the else if. Once again, be input image. And my variable value will be the Blu-ray icon. Last, we'll track the input of game. So we'll do one more else if. Set a variable. Input image. Equals Apple TV in this scenario, since that is what is plugged into game. So now we have a couple different feedbacks on our page. The first thing we need to do is actually query that device to find out what the feedback is when we enter into this page. So in this scenario, you're going to want to create an entrance. And what we'll do, go to the title of our panel, and right beneath we have entrances. I'm going to right click, add a new entrance, and now in our main window we see our entrance. From here I'm going to go to my devices, find my Integra RS-232 device, and I'm going to look for things that say query or input status. So I'm going to scroll down. Remember, we're looking for power, for volume, and for mute, and source. So I have input query. I have mute query. Power status. And finally, when I get to the bottom, I'll have volume as well. Now with your entrances, these are repeating background commands. So this is actually going to track the state of your mute, of your power, and the entrances perform the first time they enter the page. You can send it as a repeating background entrance, so you can have this entrance repeat every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds. Click on the title of the entrance, refer to the properties window. We're going to change the repeatable to yes, and now we're going to type in our 5-second repeat. You can make it as frequently or as infrequently as you'd like. In this case, I'm going to do a 1-second repeat so we get those proper statuses for the mute, for the volume, and we know what's constantly occurring. Once you have your entrance created, assign it to the page. Inside the properties of this page, go to the entrance field, tap on the entrance that we created. So now we'll get these updates for our volume, for power, for mute, and for the current source. Now what we'd like you to do for the hands-on, add a couple of feedbacks, power, volume, mute, and then create a button to track the actual mute state of your device. So create a conditional to actually track the mute state the same way we did here.